Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Very much welcome to this IDF Europe webinar, our first webinar of the year on the occasion of the centennial of insulin, 100 years of insulin. Before we start, we will wait a minute or so for everyone to log on and for our executive office to give me the sign that everything is working. We have way more than 200 people who have registered for this webinar, which is amazing. It was 1,700 on a Friday afternoon, evening, depending on where you are, 1,600 in Britain, and from wherever you are in the world, because there's a lot of international guests joining us as well. So maybe I should also say good morning to those of you joining from different time zones, or good night, good late evening for those of you joining further east. Elizabeth, are we okay? Is everybody live and online? I can already see in the chat we have first guests joining from France, from Ukraine, from the US even. All right. Let me kick off then once again. Welcome to this year's first webinar by IDF Europe, by the European chapter of the International Diabetes Federation, on the occasion of the centennial of insulin. As you all know, 1921 was the year of the discovery of insulin by Frederick Banting. So this year marks 100 years, and there will be lots of campaigns by IDF and IDF Europe, but by many, many other actors around the world. Many of you are from these other stakeholders, many patient advocates also here on the call today, more than 200. I look forward to a great webinar. We have a great lineup of speakers. I think you have all seen the agenda. We'll have opening words by Professor Andrew Bolton and Niti Paul, the presidents of IDF Global and IDF Europe, or the chair of IDF Europe. We will then have a couple of videos, then 5 experts I will introduce later with different perspectives on innovation in the last and the next 10 to maybe 100 years, and lots of time for you to come in with questions. Please use the chat for that. I will be monitoring that, and Kajsa Lindberg will later on moderate the discussion. With that, I hand over to Andrew Bolton, President of the International Diabetes Federation Global. Andrew, thank you very much for joining us with a few opening words for this first year webinar.
Thank you very much, Bastian and Niti. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and to say a few words at the beginning of this. As you've already heard from Bastian, of course, 100 years it is, and few would dispute that the discovery of insulin was probably one of the most important, or the most important discovery in medicine in the 20th century. I just thought I'd say 1 or 2 words about contributions to the history before Banting and Best discovered insulin in 21 from Europeans. Being a European myself, was sadly not a Brexiteer, I want to assure you, very much pro-Europe and saddened at the situation, but c'est la vie. Claude Bernard, France, of course, believed that pancreatectomy would lead to diabetes, but didn't think it was possible. But it was Oskar Minkowski, and I think he's one of the most important people in Europe, and he represents many countries. He was born in Aleksotis in Kovno, now Kaunas, in Lithuania. He went to school there, then his parents moved to Königsberg, now Kaliningrad, Königsberg, Prussia, Kaliningrad, of course, now in Russia. So he was born there, then he went to medical school, and then after that he worked with von Mering, the German scientist and physician who worked under Minkowski in Strasbourg. And eventually he became professor at Breslau, Prussia, now Wrocław in Poland. So he scans really all of Europe, and he was the one who successfully showed that pancreatectomy leads to diabetes in experimental animals. He was a very good physician, clearly, because he was called just before the death of Stalin to Russia to be one of the international people to see if they could save Stalin in 1923. Another one from Romania, of course, was Nicolae Paulescu. And there's still debate, and there always will be, what his role was, but he certainly developed pancrein, which might have been effective in some animals. A few words about the first president of IDF, R.D. Lawrence. R.D. Lawrence was training to be a surgeon in London in 1921 when he developed type 1 diabetes. Thinking he only had a year or two to live, he thought, I'm going to go to a nice place. He went to Firenze, Florence in Italy, to work in primary care. And I gave the R.D. Lawrence lecture of the British Diabetic Association now 30 years ago. And so I read some of his notes. And he was dying in ketoacidosis in 1923 and got a letter, a telegram. Come back, we have insulin, it seems to work. He wrote in his notes, probably another scam, but he came back very ill and was one of the first to receive insulin in England. He changed his mind and saw the light and became a diabetologist and was the senior diabetologist at King's College Hospital in London for many years. And he lived till 1968. And he was president of the IDF when it was founded in 1950. So these are one or two people. Now, we're not just talking this year about the celebration. More important is that nobody in the world with diabetes that needs insulin should go without it. And that's part of our advocacy program that we are doing, and IDF Europe, of course, are doing, my good friend Nitty Paul. And we have a very united board of the IDF. We've been through difficult times. We're coming out, even though COVID was thrust upon us in the second month of my presidency. But we're coming out, and we really are working to promote not only insulin, but the equipment needed. Insulin syringes, pumps, monitoring. And not only insulin, but all medications. People with type 2 diabetes, tablets, non-insulin injectables. We really want to push for that over the next 3 years. That is equitable access to anybody with diabetes, wherever they live in the world, for the medications they need. So we're all working together, and it's a pleasure to be with you. And now I'm going to hand over to my good friend Nitty Paul, who, as you know, is our excellent chair of this region, IDF Europe. Nitty.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for that lovely history. So good afternoon, everybody. Good morning and good evening for wherever you are. Thank you very much for registering. I see 126 registrants, participants on the call today. So we're really grateful to you for joining this. We're kicking off a series of webinars on celebrating the centenary of insulin. This is the first. We know, as Andrew said, insulin has saved many lives and still does. For us as a family, we've lived with type 1 diabetes for 27 years. My son has had type 1 diabetes for 27 years, and I couldn't thank the researchers enough, all the people that have gone before that discovered insulin, because a lot of us wouldn't be here if insulin hadn't been discovered. But we also know some really interesting innovations are happening in care across Europe. We know it's not equitable, Andrew. We know that there are many, many areas of Europe still that don't get equitable access to medicines and new technologies. But we, as an umbrella organization of more than 80 member associations across Europe, we do represent the voice of the patient, we think, with diabetes, which is really, really important to us. And the most exciting development in the last few years has been the huge engagement of people with diabetes, people like Bastian, who's here today, Kaisa, who's going to be moderating the next webinar, my own son, or lots of young youth leaders who've been really engaging with the agenda, engaging with diabetes, and leading to what we know as the Open APS program. And you're going to hear quite a lot of that from some of our panelists today. This is patients with diabetes driving their own care, driving innovations in treatments and cures. So I think we're going to see much more of that as we go along this century, I think. And we believe that the collaboration with people with diabetes is going to be key in delivering care, in delivering access, in delivering advocacy, and in delivering new treatments and new therapies. So I warmly welcome you to this webinar and launch our celebration of insulin, but also launch our advocacy program in Europe around quicker access, good access to new innovations and new technologies around diabetes across the whole Europe region. So welcome once again. Over to you, Bastian.
Thank you very much, Nitty. Thank you very much, Andrew, for joining us here and for these kind words of welcome with a bit of history. We will hear more about that in just 10 minutes or so. Before we go on, I just want to point out that we have more than 120 participants right now the call, as Niti already said, of IDF and IDF Europe, former board members, current board members of IDF and IDF Global, IDF Europe and IDF Global, a lot of familiar names, many patient advocates, but also many new names that I personally do not recognize. So very warm welcome here at this first webinar of IDF Europe in this year 2021 and for the centennial of insulin. Before we go on with the discussions, we have prepared a couple of videos that will be shown now, just very short statements from people with diabetes that not only we as IDF Europe and our many member associations represent, but that we have part and parcel of our work. So Elizabeth, please go ahead with the videos of patient voices from throughout Europe.
Alexandra Costa, sou de Portugal, tenho 36 anos e tenho diabetes tipo 1 há 25 anos. Venho falar-vos da gravidez e da importância que o avanço tecnológico no tratamento da diabetes teve na minha decisão de engravidar. Em conjunto com os profissionais de saúde da APDP e da educação terapêutica que recebo, tenho um controle metabólico muito bom com a ajuda da bomba infusora de insulina e do sensor contínuo de glicose. Quando me falam em sonhos, eu não consigo ter sonhos pessoais quando ainda vejo pessoas a morrer por falta de insulina no mundo. E, portanto, é este o meu desejo, é que a insulina chegue a todas as pessoas que precisam. Agradeço à comunidade científica todos os avanços que têm feito ao longo destes últimos anos, continuem a trabalhar para a melhoria do nosso tratamento e, sobretudo, para a cura. Peço aos nossos governantes que vejam este investimento nas tecnologias como uma melhoria da qualidade de vida das pessoas e a prevenção de complicações na nossa vida ao longo dos anos. Obrigada.
Hi, my name is Alois Rudolf. I come from Slovenia. I have had type 1 diabetes for 40 years. Diabetes treatment has changed a lot since I got diabetes. In 1980s, I measured my blood sugar in urine, not in my blood. Later on, we got the blood sugar meters, but last year I received a glucose monitoring system which completely changed the way of measuring my blood sugar. The device has made the experience easier and enjoyable. One thing which I already mentioned is that I have the glucose monitoring system, which completely changed my life because now I feel much safer while managing my glucose levels. Another personally important aspect is that I have decided after I got diabetes that I will help other people. Therefore, I joined Slovenian Diabetes Association in 1996 and later on IDF Europe. As an ambassador, I keep fighting for the rights of people with diabetes in Slovenia and elsewhere. Mainly, we are trying to get more insulin or test strips for measuring blood glucose to primarily save people's lives or just improve their everyday.
Hello, my name is Zarina, I'm from Russia. More than 17 years I have spent with my diabetes type 1. Progress in technologies means a lot for me. Being an insulin pump user for 14 years, I realize opportunities including but not limited to special policies and other features. Despite the achievements, the challenging issue is how to make the progress available for all people. Most medical tools are very expensive. As a result of changes in the currency rate, my consumables have grown in price by 20%. People living with diabetes also face barriers in career or several kinds of social activity, and as the unemployment is rising, we are in the risk group. Future changes of the world might be not quite positive, and the aim is to achieve sustainability.
Hello, I am Marti Roskans. I'm from Belgium and I've been living with type 1 diabetes for 9 years now. and today I would like to share my point of view from a person who is very passionate about several sports and high-intensity sports. I must say that CGM changed my life completely. In the beginning of my diagnosis, I gave up football and any other physical activity because I really thought that it was impossible with diabetes. But over the years, with the evolution of better insulin and CGM, I really found my way to sports again, became really passionate about cycling, and I became even more active than I was before. Finding a cure for diabetes is not my ultimate goal for a normal life. Finding a way to never experience hypoglycemia anymore, that would increase the quality of my life big time. Because I would finally be able to sleep properly again, work would go better, and sports would be so much easier.
Здравствуйте, меня зовут Мария, я из России, из города Москва. Моя жизнь с сахарным диабетом первого типа началась в 16 лет, сейчас мне 20. Каждый раз, когда появляются новые технологии в сфере диабета, меня это восхищает и сподвигает следить за своими сахарами и в целом за своим здоровьем. Скажу так, я никогда не ждала и не жду лекарств, которые излечат мой диабет. Появится лекарство? Хорошо, отлично. А если не появится, ну что поделать? Моя жизнь и так полноценно счастливая, я беру от нее абсолютно все. Существуют ли инновации, которые облегчили бы мне жизнь с сахарным диабетом? Да, существуют. Я бы хотела поставить самую новейшую помпу, всегда использовать непрерывный мониторинг. Сейчас я хочу обратиться к политикам и обществу в целом. Я хочу, чтобы в моей стране, России, получение необходимых мне для жизни лекарств не было таким сложным. Чтобы в каждом городе России люди с сахарным диабетом получали все необходимые им лекарства в нужном количестве, без конфликтов с государством, врачами. Чтобы нам не приходилось бороться за свою жизнь с сахарным диабетом, чтобы мы просто жили.
I'm a person with type 2 diabetes on insulin, and I have been married to my diabetes since March 1999. My name is Ken Tate, and I live in the UK. So what would transform my quality of life? Many things, from being able to access the various technologies that are around even, ending the stigma that surrounds those of us with type 2 diabetes. I know I don't have the easy diabetes. Better support from healthcare professionals, and to work in an equal partnership, help with emotional problems, and more inclusive in the world of diabetes. I'd like to see a world where people with all types of diabetes work, support, and help each other, and not be separated into type 1 or type 2 by these various organizations, healthcare providers, and others. After all, we do all suffer from the same various problems that can happen with diabetes.
Hello and welcome back. I hope you enjoyed these couple of minutes by people with diabetes from across Europe. It was important for us to start this way, to show that we at IDF Europe, together with our many member associations, not only represent people with diabetes, people living with diabetes, we are the people with diabetes represented through people like me, like Niti, like Andrew, like many others, volunteers, doctors, nurses. We're all coming together to be the voice of people with diabetes in Europe, with the help of our member associations and the many, many people that are engaged voluntarily with this organization. Now for the topic of the day, the Centennial of Insulin, innovation in the discovery of insulin and technologies and diabetes care. And it's my great honor to hand over to my fellow board member, Kostas Makrilakis, who will be telling a little story about the history of the discovery of insulin and innovation also moving forward. Kostas, thank you for being here. Please take over.
Thank you, Bastian. Thank you. I would like to thank the organizers of this webinar for this honorable invitation to present the history of the discovery of insulin, which is really the first step in this amazing journey of innovations that followed, that started 100 years ago and is continuing now, and the discovery of all these innovations in diabetes. Let me share my screen. Okay. So I believe you know that diabetes is not a new disease. It was actually an ancient disease, and this is the most ancient document that we have. It is called the Papyrus of Ebers, if I pronounce it correctly in German, in honor of the German archaeologist who found this document in 1962 in Luxor in Egypt. And as you can clearly read, I believe you can see that it describes a person with polyuria, without pain, but with weight loss. Most likely it was a diabetic person. And that refers to 1550 before Christ. So the experts at that time of the Pharaoh era, 3,500 years before Christ, they were treating this disease with a mixture of water from the bird pond, elderberry, fibers from the acid plant, milk, beer, cucumber flour, and green dates. I don't know if they were successful, but hopefully we're doing much better today. Professor Bolton talked a lot about the history of diabetes. Due to lack of time, I don't have the time to present all the amazing people who helped. The first time the name diabetes was coined was probably from Areteus of Cappadocia in the 2nd century after Christ, who was the third most important physician of antiquity after Hippocrates and Galen. And here you see the great, a very impressive description of this dreadful disease that hopefully we do not see it anymore in our patients, because we have much better medicines today to combat this disease that was causing actually death at that time. It was a sign of death if you got diabetes back in the old ages, with people losing a lot of urine and basically melting down into death. Today we do not see this, and this is due to the amazing people who worked over the next centuries. After the 2nd century up until now, we have a lot of people, although things went very slow for 18 centuries up to now, but things over the last century have gotten much quicker. I chose to mention Paul Langerhans, who was the person who actually described the islets that got his name in 1849. He described in his thesis, he was a medical student at that time, a 21-year-old person, and in his thesis he described the islets in the pancreas. He did not know at that time what they meant, and actually it was 14 years later, Gustave Laguesse, who found out that there was a secretion out of these cells that Langerhans described, and to his honor, he gave the name to of these cells to Paul Langerhans, although Langerhans, as I said, had no idea what these islets meant. And these are the cells that produce insulin. And over the years, we came now to the amazing identification of insulin by Frederick Banting and his medical student, Charles Burst, who worked in a small laboratory that Professor MacLeod had given them in Toronto. And they worked there with dogs, and they were able to extract the secretion of the pancreas of these dogs and give it to humans, and they were able to show that this extract was actually causing blood sugar to go down. There are 4 people that are important at that time in the discovery of insulin, apart from Dr. Banting and Charles Burst. James Collip, who was a chemist who was able to purify the extract, and of course John MacLeod, who was the professor, who initially actually did not believe Banting, but after he realized how important this was, he supported him, and they both got the Nobel Prize in 1923. So Leonard Thompson was the first person ever to receive insulin and have a good effect from that. It was the 11th of January in 1921 that he got his first dose, 15 cc of MacLeod serum, as it was called at that time. The first dose produced some abscesses in his buttocks, did not work very well. So Bunting went back to MacLeod and asked for his help, and he introduced him to Collip, who over the next 14 days was able to purify the extract from the pancreas by using acid ethanol extraction in the coal. That was the trick he used. And you see here the next injections. This is the first injection on the 11th of January, and that's why the 11th of January every year is called Leonard Thompson's Day. It did work by decreasing glucose. This is the glycosuria that was produced, but it caused these abscesses, so they stopped for a while until Collip made this purified extract. They gave the Collip's purified extract after 14 days on the 23rd of January, and they saw that it worked fine. And after a few days, they gave daily injections, and they saw an impressive decrease of insulin and ketonemia. And they stopped it for a while. Blood glucose went up. They gave the injections again. Blood glucose went down. They published this immediately, and this was the great thing that happened in the planet. And insulin was found and was used, and thousands of people, millions of people were saved. Bunting and MacLeod got the Nobel Prize in 1923. They shared it with their collaborators, Collip and Best. The important thing is that Bunting gave the patent of insulin to the University of Toronto. He sold it for $1 Canadian at that time, so that it would be used for free for everybody. And that's what we're trying to do today, to have insulin available for everyone who needs it, and every type 1 person needs it, and many type 2 persons need it. And it's really a pity that people die because of lack of insulin today. It should be made available, like the vaccine we have for COVID now should be made available for everybody. The same for insulin should be made available for everybody who needs it. Over the next 100 years, we have great innovations in insulin. After they used the animal insulins in the beginning, we came today to be using human insulin, which is not coming from animals anymore. It's the real human insulin, and we have insulin analogs that are able work either faster or able to use different, given insulin in the right place. We give it subcutaneously. We should be giving it in the portal vein, but things are working much better now than in the past. Of course, it is not only insulin. Other than insulin, we have another 10 categories of medicines that are being used for diabetes treatment today. And there's great innovations also in these medicines over the last year, and the pace is over the last 20 to 30 years. So in the last years, we have seen a great deal of medications being produced by the pharmaceutical companies, and these medications are helping a lot in decreasing the burden of hyperglycemia, especially in type 2 diabetes. Insulin delivery devices, syringes, and pens are improving. We have today technology helping us. So the quality of life for people with diabetes is improving a lot. They do not have to use the reusable syringes that they used in the beginning. They can carry them in their pockets. They can use them anytime in a very discreet manner, and things are improving. Artificial pancreas is coming. You see here the first insulin pump that was used, the Biostator, a very huge machine that proved that it can work. We see the syringe auto injector next to a modern insulin pump. You see the big differences that are being used over the previous decades. Blood glucose monitoring devices have also improved. We're able today to have monitoring devices that can measure blood glucose without pricking and getting blood. So we can monitor glucose automatically throughout the day. And we have the ability today to have a communication between the sensors and the insulin delivery devices. So we're coming close to our real dream is to have a closed loop system and have an artificial pancreas that will work automatically and help people with diabetes monitor and also control their blood glucose automatically without them having the burden of doing this. And this is really coming in reality slowly. We have the artificial pancreas coming in. The hybrid artificial pancreas is already here. It's working very, very well during the night. We still have to wait for some innovations to see if the algorithms and the devices and the insulins that keep on improving will work during the day. We have the do-it-yourself artificial pancreas movement that especially people with knowledge in technology are using, and it looks like it is working. Technology is improving, and the regulatory authorities are also moving towards this direction slowly but constantly. And the movement of we're not waiting actually is pushing things to the right direction. So we hope that much more quickly things will improve and move towards this direction of having the artificial pancreas available for everyone. Self-management, diabetes education, patient empowerment is very critical. People with diabetes need to take the disease in their hands. They have to be the doctors of themselves, but first they have to be educated, otherwise they will not do well. So we need to have them be educated, learn about their disease, learn about the complications that might arise, and use the devices, use the medicines that are available, and try and improve their disease and their quality of life as much as possible. So we have spent the last 100 years in developing insulin and all these innovations. Hopefully, we will not need another 100 years for the ultimate prevention and the definitive treatment of this disease. And I think in the next few decades, we will see a lot of things coming in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kostas. That was Professor Kostas Markilakis from the National University of Athens in Greece and a fellow board member here at the International Diabetes Federation in Europe, who talked about the history of insulin all the way from the first papyrus rolls where it was first mentioned to the discovery 100 years ago and to pointing towards what the future holds. And this is what we now want to do. We now want to look at this journey of innovation that lies behind us, but look at what is before us. And I know that on the agenda, it says what the future holds 100 years from now. Personally, I very much hope that 100 years from now, diabetes will be nothing but a distant memory. So maybe the next 5, 10, 20 years are more realistic, but we have 5 excellent speakers now who will touch upon the different innovations that Kostas already touched upon. And I would like to start calling up Dr. Marko Salahimu from the Helsinki City Hospital, University of Helsinki. He's also a member of INODIA, the patient advisory board there, because Marko, you're not only a great researcher, you're also living yourself with diabetes, and I know your son, your 22-year-old son, lives with type 1 diabetes, and I love the fact that many of the best researchers in the world also have a very personal connection to this disease. Please take it away.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me? It is right. So I'm really honored to be one person in here, one person with diabetes in this group now in here. And INODIA, it is our promise of the future in type 1 diabetes, or actually stopping type 1 diabetes or reverting it back to be no diabetes. I've just picked 4 trials, 4 projects of INODIA, thanks to Chantal Mathieu and Olivia Arnault and all people in there behind, and you with diabetes. So first of them, we have this MELD ATG, anti-tumor globulin, which is actually a really good drug since it has been used before in other autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis to try to solve that problem. But in here, these researchers give this to people with newly diagnosed diabetes, and they try to keep in control T lymphocytes, which are the cells which normally in this situation, autoimmunity system, they destroy beta cells, and by that way, they can stop this destruction. Another study is really also important one. It's about verapamil, an old antihypertensive calcium channel blocker. And in that, it's known that verapamil in some studies, in animal studies, it has been shown to preserve insulin-producing cells. It has been shown to somehow boost insulin production by these people who have just got their diabetes newly diagnosed. So stopping, and perhaps then stopping it by the way that body can itself reserve the situation or revert it back. So the third one, which I picked up, is impact, which is a really special one. It's for the first time in there, it's so that they have modified, these researchers, a really novel method, modified peptides to turn off this cascade in a special place. And by doing that, they really stop the progression of the ongoing disease. It's really, really wonderful study protocol. Hopefully it will work and help us, all people with diabetes, especially those in big risk and those just getting it. And then the fourth one is, it's really strange name, iscalimab. Well, different drug again. It's a monoclonal antibody, which really blocks a specific type of immune cell of the system. And this is called CD40, which is really important for the destruction. And now, in this time, it really can do the work. It seems, at least, in before done studies, before this big trial again. So 4 different approaches, since type 1 diabetes is also a heterogeneous disease when thinking about how you get it or how you go on with it regarding the risk of complications. So these studies from different approaches, different ways, they pave the they pave the way to find out the opportunities to prevent disease or to halt its going on, and then to that state when there's no return, so insulin dependency. And hopefully these people, when they get this drug, we know more of that, and we can come back from those stage of no return. We can reverse the process back to healthy people, so that not so many people are in need of closed loop systems or then islet cell transplantations or stem cell treatment in the future. There's a big hope. I'm really enthusiastic, and we need all of you, all people with diabetes, to come in and their near families to Inodia. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much for introducing Inodia and the 4 main studies they have been or still are carrying out. And thank you also for your involvement there, because I know you're not only doing great research as a professor, but you are, as we mentioned in the beginning, on the Inodia Patient Advisory Board as someone living with diabetes, which is a voluntary task, of course. Thank you very much for this great presentation. Our next speaker is Elko de Koning. He is a professor of diabetology at the Leiden University Medical Center, and he coordinates the National Island Transplantation Program in the Netherlands. Elko, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Please take it away.
Thank you, Bastian. It's such a pleasure to be among these remarkable people in the panel, and to be here and to share some of my thoughts with you about the next 100 years of in the research in diabetes. And what I'll do is share some slides with you. Because my view is that, and many people, of course, in the field, that innovation is so important for both patients with type 2 diabetes and type 1 diabetes, but in fact, all types of diabetes. And the beta cells, the insulin-producing cells, play a crucial role. So in the pancreas, we have about 1 million islets of Langerhans. Paul Langerhans, we just heard about him, who discovered those, and about 1 billion insulin-producing beta cells. And when you look at the perspective of type 2 diabetes, it's metabolic factors and genetics and aging that slowly lead to a dysfunction of these cells and a slow reduction in the number of cells. And of course, in type 1 diabetes, there is a destruction because of an autoimmune problem, with genetics also playing a small role, but leading to a rapid destruction of these cells. So in my view, the novel therapeutic strategies, if we want to make an important difference in the development, of course, of the disease, should be focused on the beta cells. And I call these the 3 musketeers for beta cell health. So it's prevention, protection, and regeneration or replacement once many beta cells are destroyed. And these are really the 3 key issues to protect the beta cells. So how about if you already have lost many beta cells, such as in type 1 diabetes? Well, when we look back in the past 100 years, we started with insulin. We just heard about it in 1922 on the 11th of January. And right now, it is in fact still insulin. So from this perspective, it may be disappointing to the compounds that are used to treat it. Of course, from another perspective, we have made huge progress using all the technology that is around and the different formulations. So how about the novel treatments in those who have already lost many beta cells? So here it's the regeneration or replacement. And I foresee that in the next 100 years, we will be able to get a lot of insight how a pancreas forms, how the beta cell forms, and we can do that in a dish. So this is, for example, a small piece of human pancreas which is growing in a laboratory dish, and this is going to give us insight in how to deal with generating new cells and how to improve perhaps regeneration in vivo. Still a long way to go, but important. Then beta cell replacement, because it's the only way to get beta cells back once you don't have many anymore. Of course, we can do that in 2 ways at the moment, using organ donors that basically provide the pancreas that can be transplanted into a recipient, usually with type 1 diabetes, or the islets of Langerhans can be isolated in a laboratory. Then the islets are transplanted, calling islet transplantation. But in fact, this procedure is only performed in less than 1 in 10,000 of patients with type 1 diabetes. And it can have an enormous impact. For example, this is one of my patients that I saw last week, a lady in her late 50s, many problems with glycemic control despite a lot of technology. She had an islet transplantation 3 months ago, 800,000 islets, an uncomplicated procedure. And now, after 55 years, she doesn't have the need anymore to inject herself with insulin, with very straight glucose value. But this comes at a price at the moment, because we always have to look at risk-benefit ratios. And currently, with islet or pancreas transplantation, it means that there is lifelong treatment with drugs that suppress the immune system, and these can have severe side effects. And another reason why this is not going to be applied to a wide number of people with type 1 diabetes is a shortage of organ donors. So we need to make these kind of novel cell replacement therapy available for more people with type 1 diabetes and with lesser side effects because of the immunosuppressive drugs. And that's why this European Union consortium, Islet, that I'm part of, and Hendrik Semp as well, who will speak after me, where we really want to develop novel cell replacement therapies in patients with severe beta cell failure. Thank you very much for your attention.
Elko, thank you for this wonderful presentation, which does give some hope for what the future holds, which is the topic of this panel discussion. I would like to remind everybody in the audience right now, almost more than 150 people now, to please put forward your question either in the chat or the Q&A section, and we will pick them up later during the discussion in just about 10-15 from the University of Copenhagen. He's also the executive director of the Center for Stem Cell Biology with the Novo Nordisk Foundation and works at the Translational Stem Cell Research Center with the Helmholtz Diabetes Center in Munich. And he will talk about stem cells, of course. Henrik, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to participate in this webinar and to share some of the work we're really engaged in, and also to give you an outlook, what we can expect the next 10 to 20 years ahead. So we just heard from Elko that islet transplantations really provides a beautiful proof of concept that cell therapy actually works in type 1 diabetes as a therapy. And but the problem with the shortage of donor has motivated the scientists in the past decades to look for new exogenous sources for transplantable beta cells. And as many of you are probably familiar with pluripotent stem cells, they're usually referred to human embryonic stem cells or human-induced pluripotent stem cells. These cells are very promising, and the reason for why so is because these stem cells can be cultured in basically unlimited amounts in a tissue culture dish. And these cells have the amazing capacity to differentiate into all our different cell types in our body, including insulin-producing beta cells. So in the past decade, scientists have really tried to solve all the mysteries around how these cells are normally born in the pancreas in our body when we are as a fetus. And through a lot of amazing discoveries around the world, we are now able to actually engineer islet-like clusters from these pluripotent stem cells. And what you see on the slide here on the left, you see the golden standard, the human islet. And to the right, you see quite similar aggregates of insulin and glucagon producing cells from pluripotent stem cells. So we're actually quite far in making these aggregates. And what I want to share with you is why do we think these are interesting, and why are they the future in terms of cell therapy? So as I mentioned to you, if we can make cells and solve how to transplant cells into patients, and maybe even all patients with type 1 diabetes, this, in terms of the amount of cell, will not be a problem because we can grow unlimited amount of these cells. They actually also provide some advantages in that we can, since these cells are very easy to manipulate, we can actually design optimal cell products for that. When I say optimal, that they actually are perfect in terms of the therapeutic capacity. As you may know that when we isolate islets from donor pancreas, the quality of these islets vary from each preparation. So here we could actually develop methods where every time you make a preparation, it's exactly the same cells that can be transplanted into the patients. Now, this is the last slide that I want to share with you to also discuss some of the opportunities in the near future and also more long-term, and that actually also touches upon the challenges. So there are basically three challenges in terms of developing future cell therapies based on pluripotent stem cells. And the biggest challenge is the immunogenicity, of course, because the concept is built on that we will transplant allogenic cells. That means that these pluripotent stem cells comes from another donor. They are not derived from the patients. So there is a rejection problem. The other problem is, of course, that even if we can make the optimal insulin-producing beta cells, they will be attacked by the immune system in type 1 diabetic patients. So of course, as Elko described to you, we can use immunosuppressive drugs to overcome this, but that means that only a very few patients can actually benefit from this treatment. The other limitation is safety. So these stem cells, if you graft them as undifferentiated cells, they will form, they have the capacity to form tumors. So it's very important that the product that is engineered is completely free of these undifferentiated pluripotent stem cells. And there's ways to do that, of course. And this I'm not concerned about, because there's really very good methods for avoiding this problem. The last problem is efficacy and functionality of the cell product. And I think this is the area where we have reached pretty far. So if I would predict sort of a therapy based on pluripotent stem cells in the next 5 to 10 years, I would predict that the first step is to show that we can do exactly the same thing as we do with islet transplantation. That is to make a cell product, and we're basically there now, and to use immunosuppressive drugs in patients with severe forms of diabetes, and show that we can get exactly the same effect, or maybe even better effects than with preparations of donor pancreas islets. The more long-term perspective is, of course, that we would like to get closer to a curative therapy. And but to be honest, this is one line of research to do cell replacement. And of course, I think that the absolute best method towards a curative therapy is, of course, if we can understand why we get the disease and devise a therapy that stops the disease. Because maybe if you then combine that with early diagnostics, then you can do with the cells you have, and you can maybe even have restoration of the cell mass. The other, if this is not possible, or I think it will, but it may take some time. So in the meantime, I think what we're looking at is to combine immune therapy and also use the patient's own cells to combine immune therapy and also making beta cells from reprogrammed cells from the skin or the blood, so-called induced pluripotent stem cells. So that would get close to a curative therapy. This is, I think, more in the line of looking, 20, 30 years, 40 years ahead. I'm usually more realistic than I've learned that with all the years I've been in science. So I don't want to promise something that cannot be delivered. So I thank you for your attention, and I will be happy, later to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Henrik. Thank you very much. And I'm glad to hear that you're not promising the cure will be there in 5 years, because we've heard this for decades, and it's quite frustrating from a patient perspective, from a person living with diabetes perspective. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Professor Tadeusz Badolini from, he's head of Department of Pediatric and Adolescent Endocrinology at the University of Ljubljana in Slovenia, but probably more familiar to most of you here on the call as his co-chair role at ATTD. So Tadeusz, thank you for joining us. Looking forward to your presentation, which I believe will be more on the digital side of things. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Bastian, and thank you, IDF Europe, for this very kind invitation. I'm sitting here and watching the presentations and reading the chat, and I have to say it's a really lovely event. So I'm proud and happy to be with you. Many famous people try to speak about the future and failed badly. So I kindly ask you to really take whatever I say, with a little bit of salt. So may or may not become true. So I would like to propose to you to go with me briefly over the future of sensing and then insulin delivery, artificial intelligence, and less burden that was already addressed by one of my predecessors. If we start with the sensing, what can happen is, and I think it's feasible, so it's not a promise that will, just disturb you and then go away, is long-term implantable devices. And this is a device actually that is kind of an HPLC, so chromatography device that's miniaturized on a chip that's here and then transmits data and can measure multiple things at the same time, like ketone bodies along with glucose. And if well done, can be quite accurate. So it's basically the fingerprints of all these metabolites in the interstitial fluid are measured on this chip and then transferred through the skin into this device. This technology is not easy. It's probably more than 20 years of development behind it, but it actually has a promise to be among us unless something go wrong very badly. And perhaps long-term implantable, long-term perhaps means 10 years, is a way to go. And insulin delivery, of course, we have now the smart pens that are coming on the front door in all different kinds. I agree with many of you. It will only work along with an advisor, with a dosing system that will assist this dosing. And I would particularly like to refer to our friend with type 2 diabetes from the video. This is a typical case when such connected pens, injectors with an advising system that specifically advise on dosing could be extremely helpful. Of course, it can also be combined with a continuous sensor. There are some more futuristic ways of insulin delivery. One, of course, is the transdermal. There are clinical studies ongoing. This one even has a glucose sensing system, which is even more futuristic. So it's not something that I would put at the moment my faith in, but there are researchers that basically develop this and try to bring it to life. And of course, it's oral insulin. As you know, now more than a year ago, Lancet Diabetes Endocrinology published a formal clinical trial demonstrating that oral insulin can be effective. There are, however, several caveats at the moment that precludes this to be commercialized, but basically the way to go already has been seen. Artificial intelligence being probably particularly during those terrible COVID pandemic moments, months, now almost a year, they are good data. So this is a Nature Medicine randomized trial comparing endocrinologists from Joslin, from Harvard, and from Denver, and from Florida, and from Yale, and from Hanover, Germany, and from Israel. So very good centers that were competing with the artificial intelligence, with the computer. As you can see here on the total data, so intent to treat, there were no difference in between these diabetologists and the computer. But in the per protocol analysis, the advisor, the artificial intelligence was even slightly superior, slightly better than those diabetologists. So it's very interesting, and I hope that artificial intelligence can help more than it does at the moment. These advisors got the FDA approval and the CE mark, so they're basically available on the market already very recently, and can be an additional help for reducing the burden of the disease. Then, of course, the advanced heartbeat closed loop were mentioned. These two are not future. They are here on the European market. They work well, looks like surprisingly well. The biggest difference is that they don't exit the auto mode. They stay in the auto mode, so they stay helpful, which really reduces the burden. This one already with a sensor without calibration. Here, the sensor without calibration is coming in the next months. So hopefully, these two systems will be helpful and will reduce the burden to many, many with diabetes. And additionally, we discussed the future. The future is that somebody would monitor what we do, like Google, like Apple, and inform this advanced hybrid closed loop systems on our usual intentions and doings, which may additionally improve its performance during the day. It actually does sound a little bit Big Brother-like, but there are serious studies ongoing that could be helpful for additionally reducing the burden in the future. Reducing the burden actually means easier to use, less invasive. I didn't touch the non-invasive glucose monitoring because it's a lot of promises with very little clinical outcomes at the moment. They should be more intuitive and particularly more automated. And more automated recently became, as you know, with the pandemic, a very serious initiative. And we are having a new consensus on the technology and information use in type 2 diabetes, which is where is a great need now during the ATTD in June. So I hope we will be able to push this more automation and easiness into this current treatment of diabetes until we hopefully, like Marcus said, find a cure and forget about all this and just, put it on the shelf as a bad memory. Thank you again very, very much for your kind attention. This is one of the endemic flowers in the Alps, and we are very lucky to have them in my country early in spring in higher mountains. At the moment, it's a bad winter, but spring's always coming after it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tadej. And as we heard 2 days ago in a different context, for there is always light if only we are brave enough to be it. May that flower be for that and for all the work that you and everybody we've heard so far on this call and the many hundreds and thousands of researchers around the globe are doing. Our last speaker here is Dr. Sophia Hussein. He's a physician at Guy's and St. Thomas Hospital and an honorary senior clinical lecturer at King's College in London. He himself, as we started with a person living with diabetes and a researcher, that's how we end as well. Sufyan is himself living with type 1, and he's also a member of the Open Project doing research on the DIY artificial insulin delivery systems. Sufyan, welcome as our last speaker here on this call. Please take it away.
Hi, thanks, Bastian, and thank you very much for the privilege of coming to speak here, give you my thoughts and perspectives. And as Bastian mentioned, obviously it's sort of intertwined with my own personal journey and experiences living with type 1 for almost 30 years, but it's clearly professional perspectives on where we hopefully will be driving ourselves. My personal interest is in diabetes technologies across both type 1 and type 2 diabetes. I've had an excellent talk from Tadej, which actually hopefully means that I can actually keep this a little bit shorter for you and do more. We can do more in question and answers, but really just to remind ourselves of where we've come from. I mean, my own personal story started in a third world country, living in a place called Karachi, which is not far from India, in Pakistan, having been diagnosed with type 1. And the standard of care there was twice daily injections with syringe and vial, once weekly testing, and then urine testing in the middle. And boy, we've come a long way since that early 90s to where we are now. Certainly in my practice, almost 150 people using automated insulin delivery systems. We've got four commercial versions of these available. But I mentioned this journey really to highlight that unfortunately, this level of care is still the norm, and even access to insulin is still difficult. And we'll touch on some aspects related to access and health literacy, which is clearly important for the next 5, 10, 15 years. But just sticking to artificial pancreas systems, Tadej's already mentioned some of the excellent work that's going on, and that encompasses, hopefully, over the coming years, about dual hormone systems, also using glucagon, particularly when you're trying to overcome situations such as exercise, fast-acting insulins, improved sensor accuracy. And we've already talked about algorithmic improvements, which hopefully will get us to a stage where we can have complete automation. At the moment, the systems still require manual work, so they're hybrid systems, but hopefully getting to a stage of complete automation. And one big one, which is a huge challenge for all of us, is cost. Because in the UK, even these systems are several £1,000s. Currently, in my clinic, only about 1 to 3% of people with type 1 can access these. And when we're trying to embrace the bigger picture of type 1 and type 2 diabetes globally, they're huge challenges. So with that in mind, realizing that certainly in some parts of the world, the technology we're really talking about is access to a fridge, we really need to think about what else can we deliver that will have low cost implications and widen the access. Tade's again touched on these. There are also very strong implications for the wider type 2 diabetes management. Some of these, and Tade rightly mentions, this is not quite ready yet, but my hope is, again, when we're thinking about the next 10 years, this will be something that could be delivered, which is non-invasive glucose monitoring, with the advantage, and these are versions that are currently available, where you can finger scan to get a glucose reading that can be coupled into a smartphone, the accuracy of which needs to improve clearly, but the advantage is you can have a one-off investment on your reader and therefore save on the cost of test strips, clearly advantageous from a long-term perspective. But equally, further advances in glucose sensors, and we've already heard from Tade about implantable ones, but equally also lower cost, which hopefully will widen the access to more people as well. Smart pens, and I absolutely agree with Tade, this will become really useful when you couple them with smartphone-based advisors for people with type 1 and type 2 diabetes to offer them the advice they need on insulin delivery, how much to dose and how much to take based on their situation and context and timing, take into account hopefully even other things such as movement, exercise, timing. So bringing all those aspects into dose better and in languages that are more than just a few that we have at the moment. So those are some of the sort of where we're heading, which Tade has mentioned. And I think lower cost pumps. At the moment, there are patch pumps that are available for type 2 diabetes as very low cost options in the United States. But I think these still need a lot more enhancement and development and using the smartphone as an interface that could then offer benefit for more. Certainly, even when you think about looking after diabetes in the elderly setting, in care homes and nursing homes and those with dementia, the advantages of having a system that can interface and be remotely controlled allows advantages for a lot of our healthcare practitioners. Currently, we have a lot of district nurses who have to go out and deliver insulin. So certainly advantages there. And equally, I haven't touched on therapeutics, but Tade's mentioned oral insulins, long-acting 7-day insulins. Again, when we're looking at certain groups, this may offer key advantages about improving the ability to offer care for more people. And then finally, when we're talking about technology, I really want to touch on a point which Niti mentioned very early on, which is the collaboration of people living with diabetes, which is key in delivering new therapies. We've had a lot of emphasis on co-production in the UK, and certainly a few years ago, some of the big think tanks put this out about the future of healthcare, people-powered, technology-driven healthcare. And you don't have to look very far. You have to just look at diabetes as really an exemplar of this, of driving care through communities that have built up online, that have offered cost-based and resource-savvy ways of managing diabetes. And the driver for this is being the need to improve our knowledge, empowering more individuals to self-manage, the need for peer support, but also because different healthcare access globally, the cost of care and the burden of care certainly varies a lot for individuals living in different parts. And some examples of these, I won't have time to talk through them, are indeed the do-it-yourself systems or open source systems. I don't mention these as examples of treatments, but examples of a journey of how communities have come together to improve the delivery of care in a very resource-centered manner, using access to care facilities that people have. And equally, online support groups available in different languages, and a byproduct of which is a lot of the excellent work that's going on around promoting access to more treatments, such as free insulins globally. So this is stuff that most of you in the chat room, hopefully all yourselves can do, some great young leaders that we need to help move this on even further. And I'll leave it there and hopefully open it up for the question and answer session after this.
Sophia, and thank you very much for this inspiring talk on something that is a bit closer and already happening. And also thank you very much for raising the important aspect of access to any of these innovations and treatments as they come or as they are available here, but not necessarily in many, many places around the world. I did see the Sparrow Rose logo there. I will get to that towards the very, very end. Thank you very much, because the motto of the Centennial is, of course, also leave no one behind. With that, having said, I would like to hand over to Kaisa. Kaisa is a long-term close friend of IDF and IDF Europe from many years ago, starting with the youth leadership camps and labs that we have been doing. She's the former president of the Swedish Diabetes Association, and since the beginning of the year, now running the Medtronic for interest reasons. Kaisa, thank you very much for taking over the discussion. There have been many questions in the chat, and please, everybody in the audience, feel free to add more. We have been taking account of those that came in and will be doing so moving forward. Kaisa, questions from the audience to the speakers. Take it away.
Thank you, Bastian, and thank you, as always, to IDF Europe for inviting me. And a special thank you to our eminent speakers today, some of you whom I know personally, and I'm happy to see again. It's wonderful to be here today. I'm someone living with type 1 diabetes, and insulin obviously has given me a second chance at life, similar to the rest of us here living with diabetes. It's a wonderful foundation, the Centenary of Insulin, to talk about future innovations. And we have several questions here. Both that we have collated from social media prior to this webinar and those that have come in from the audience during the webinar. I'm going to have to ask you to be brief in your answers as time is ticking, as always. The first question is a rather broad one, but an important one. It's a question that we've gotten from social media. And someone asking, will there ever be a time where diabetes is not a 24/7 burden, not cure-wise, but rather having specific treatment that would require the patient's input for only a few minutes per week? And I'm seeing that my video is green here, but I am feeling fine. Anyone who feels compelled to answer?
Well, a short and honest reply is no. There is, I mean, you know, I don't hate many things, but lying is one of them. So I don't do it. So I don't believe there is a system, let's call it this way, that would enable an individual with diabetes to only have a couple minutes a week of burden. However, you know, the night is, as nicely stated by one of you today, is almost out. So the night is settled, which is 6 to 8 hours. And most of light meals, I think, can be also put in this category. It's not without thinking, but it's with less thinking. Can we promise you, you know, like a 24/7 bulletproof safe system? I don't believe so. Glucagon is an option, but it complicates the system considerably. So let me say this way, I more believe in a very gradual development of this automated systems with a lot of caution, not to be dangerous. Yet, probably in 5 years, we will again see a major step forward. Perhaps not to the extent that you want.
Thank you so much for that answer. We have a question in the chat from the wonderful Anne Felton, and I would like to address this to Professor de Koning. She asks, what are the implications of diabetes on the alpha cells? Is this an area of research in the basic scientific research and management of diabetes mellitus?
Yeah, so this is a very good point, because in fact, diabetes is only not characterized by a deficiency, either in absolute or in relative terms, of insulin, but there's also too much glucagon, and whether the beta cells themselves play an important role in this, that they do not suppress glucagon, and how glucagon in fact plays a major role in glycemic dysregulation. There's still a lot of unanswered question. And it's also a relevant question for future beta cell replacement therapy, because we talk perhaps about beta cell replacement therapy, but you know, shouldn't it be islet replacement therapy? What cells should be replaced? Should we replace only the beta cells or the beta cells and the alpha cells? Or should we also include the delta cells that make somatostatin in our final preparations? So there's still many unanswered questions. Also, which cells are needed in future replacement therapy?
Thank you so much for that. We had a question here from Elena de Pantelido. She's, I think, positive but a bit frustrated about us having such a long-term perspective. She's asking about the next 5 to 10 years. Can't we have a treatment to reteach the immune system not to attack the insulin-producing cells? Insulin-producing islets, yes. Anyone who feels compelled to answer?
Perhaps Marco wants to answer, or...
Marco, you are on mute. You need to unmute yourself.
Yes, sorry. I was actually, I thought that Tadeusz would like to answer to that, but if you repeat the question, sorry.
The question is, can we have a treatment to reteach the immune system not to attack the insulin-producing islets, and preferably within the near future?
Well, not in the near future. I don't believe that, but perhaps in 10, 15 years, there may be some of these projects or trials which are just going to begin. They are part of the system. It may be so that we can, in the future, we must make a summary of these good trials which we are now doing, or the researchers are doing. But at the moment not, but hopefully we can reverse it we can combine some of those, perhaps that antibody drug with other one, ATG. We do not know yet, but it's a difficult way to go through because of the autoimmunity is so important for the people.
And related to that, we have a question from John Cobb, who wonders, is there any progress on knowing better why type 1 diabetes starts?
If Marco started this, and there are actually now at the moment 4 trials, clinical trials within Inodia, basically at least 3 of them directly addressing this question. So it's one and the same. So, you know, why the system attacks one type of cell in the body, and then, you know, if we can reteach or prevent or stop it. It's not easy, because immune system is a very complex system of cells that communicate and teach each other. So to block this entire system is considerably more complicated than it looks like, particularly in humans. I mean, the trouble is many animal trials were successful. And this is where all this enthusiasm among people with diabetes starts. You know, they read something in nature and they don't realize that this was a mice model. Almost everybody can treat mice by now. Unfortunately, the human immune system is considerably more redundant and complex. So when we transfer these trials to the clinical environment, many of those fail. So I think I keep my enthusiasm for this extremely high. The beta cell biology interventions are paramount. They're extremely difficult, also burdensome to people with diabetes. So my admiration to all those that participate continuously in these trials, to be honest with you. But I think we will make it sometime. I'm just not sure, as Marco said, that it is within the very near future. Perhaps we will need some more time, really, to get there with your help.
Thank you. I think all of us appreciate the honesty here. Like Bastian mentioned, a lot of us have heard from the day of diagnosis that a cure will only be 5 years away. So I think all of us appreciate that positive, the optimistic honesty. A question that comes up sometimes and that we got from social media is the possibility of in the future having an app to check our blood sugar and then take a picture of the food that we eat. This is something that is partially underway, but what are the possibilities of having that and having the app analyze the photo and helping us decide how much insulin to take? And they've also included taking into account the activity level. This is complicated.
So if I may go on, this is closer, actually. They are systems in existence that do this. So you take a photo of the food. Some need a little bit of description, some don't. You have to say it's carbs or it's meat. Some recognize even kind of food. And also the activity with an actimeter automatically transferred to the system is in existence. So I have a strong feeling that this will come, actually, that the big companies, including very big companies that are not diabetes related, they are data related, or those gadgets related, will really kick in and do it. So I think here hope is slightly closer than with the cell biology approaches.
So the next question, I think, as an advocate of diabetes is important to me, and this comes from João Nabaj, who's the previous president of IDF Europe. He mentions that in the future, no matter what innovations we'll have, we'll still need strong empowerment of people with diabetes, and education still is a major pillar in diabetes treatments. And these innovations will need strong advocates and strong initiatives to boost the access to all patients. So what can you mention some innovative ways of empowering people who are living with diabetes that you are expecting over the next few years? Perhaps a difficult question, not one that you usually think about.
I'll jump in a little, and then obviously others can probably give their ideas as well. But I think we've seen some excellent examples already from some of the work that I mentioned earlier. But I think, just looking at the next 5 years, it's really, again, online, community driven, being able to distill that information and reach out to those who we as clinicians, I find sometimes hard to engage with, but also something about culture and language and being able to reach out to them in a manner. I don't introduce culture as talking about different countries, but even culture in terms of different generations. So being able to reach out to them into a manner that we as healthcare professionals sometimes are unable to. So getting that information is key, and I absolutely agree empowerment is vital. I mean, Jocelyn back in the 1920s coined the diabetic who lives the longest is the one who knows the most. That was those exact phrases. And I think we still see that empowerment and being able to use all the tools, whichever ones you're using, is fundamental. So we've seen a lot of improvement in that from what's happening in the online communities, but again, it still requires a certain level of engagement and motivation to reach into it. Still requires some element of digital literacy, and those are the barriers that we're trying to understand. How do we uncover them? How do we reach out to the ethnic minority groups in the UK, for example, and do a little bit better in that? So hopefully in the next few years, we'll get better understanding about which platforms to use in order to reach out to them better and encompass that. And others may have some better ideas about what might be happening.
Thank you so much for that answer. That's especially meaningful considering that you also live with diabetes. Can I ask the same question to Marco, another person who also wears dual hats in this webinar?
What to do, how to get more diabetes name into the podium in our different places of the societies and countries. I think that we still need more advocacy to our politicians and our parliaments in EU, in different countries, and in there we certainly, as a National Diabetes Association, we may perhaps gather, just like we've done in IDF Europe, more to think about the future advocacy. And at least at home, we are now, after all these elections again, we are trying to get more power through our diabetes parliamentary group. That's one channel to go, which has not been done properly until now. That's the way to get money to the diabetes research also.
Thank you for sharing that. It's very meaningful to have your input on that. My last question I would address to Professor Sam. If you were to mention one thing, what do you think is needed to help foster innovation within diabetes?
Well, I can only answer in my own research area. And so if we're going to use stem cells for cell replacement therapy and address the immunological barriers, one thing that would solve that immediately would be if we had a device to put the cells in. The device would protect the cells from autoimmunity and also from the rejection aspect. And I know there are a lot of research both in the private sector, also in the academic area, but we haven't identified such a device yet. And this means that we have to, of course, pursue this, but we have to also take alternative routes to make sure that we will solve the problem somehow in the end.
Thank you so much. I'm sure there are more questions. I know there are in the chat. And I'm going to hand over now to Bastian. Sadly, we don't have time for other questions. I'm going to hand over to Bastian and see. I know you, Bastian, have a lot of insight on this. Do you have any opinions on what we've heard so far?
Yeah, and I'm really sorry for having to be so German now and cutting this great discussion off, because there's a lot of questions both in the chat and in the Q&A, and we even had more that came in by social media earlier. So we could probably go on for hours, but you know how it is with these webinars. You have to kind of try and keep it short and crisp. I want to thank all speakers for having done so and given this wide variety of perspectives on the centennial of insulin, on what the future holds. It was important for us to give on this first webinar, give a bit of an overview about the innovation that insulin was and the innovations yet to come and where we're going. I would like to address the audience, all the questions you might still have that we could not answer right now. Please go visit the website of IDF Europe and IDF. You will find that there's new sections on the centennial of insulin, where you can see more materials, more videos. There will be a lot happening over the months to come throughout this year, where we celebrate 100 years of insulin. And you can also always reach out to IDF Europe, the host of this webinar, with questions. If they are specific to this webinar today, we will forward them to our amazing speakers. Again, thank you very much for joining us, all 5 of you. Thank you, Kaisa, for such an excellent facilitation of the questions. And one last point, because it also came up in the chat, yes, everybody in the diabetes online community or diabetes community, regardless of whether he or she is living with diabetes, doing research on diabetes, treating people with diabetes, can contribute to the one thing that Sufyan also highlighted and that I would like to highlight as well on the centennial of insulin, which is about leave no one behind. Make sure that also those that cannot access insulin, that cannot access all these innovation, that we can at least do a little bit to help them at least survive the next month. And that is, please donate to Life for a Child, and do so now, because we are just before Valentine's Day. And on Valentine's Day and throughout February, the Diabetes Online community runs the Spare a Rose campaign. You can donate 1 rose less to your big love on Valentine's Day. For the $5 or €5 that you save, you can buy enough insulin through Life for a Child, through Spare a Rose, for children in the least developed countries in this world to survive for a full month. And I think for the centennial of insulin, that is a very noble cause. With that, I would like to close and hand over for last closing remarks to our chair-elect of IDF Europe, Professor Nebosa. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Bastian. When I was given this role at the end of this very interesting meeting, and it was like I should give an answer what would be the diabetes in the next 100 years. I was a little bit afraid that, and I definitely cannot imagine what we will have in the next 100 years, but I can only dream about. And what I can dream about is, in fact, something which we can do right now. The thing is that right now we can see something which has been mentioned already by Niti, at the beginning, and then continued by Safian, and but also mentioned on the other hand by all other speakers, that we have very many sophisticated ways of treating diabetes, coming from the technology side, but also coming from, let's say, biological side, immunology, and so on. And in many cases, we really don't know, in fact, what is going on. And I'm very much in favor of this type of exchange of information, that what has been achieved, and this is really a great enthusiasm invested. I do hope that we will keep with this enthusiasm for the next 100 years. But on the other side, we are facing a very sad situation, that all this is not accessible by, I would say, the majority of the people suffering from diabetes, or at least by a great portion, and that this is a thing at which we should focus right now. I mean, from this day, in the next 100 years, but starting nowadays. And this depends not only from the government and from the stakeholders, and from but also from the organizations gathering the people with diabetes. We should try to create with them the environment in which all this technology can work for all those ones that would need it. That starts from maybe making an environment, including digitalization of care, including a value-based care, and including patient-oriented care. But in general, this is an important activity by which we can contribute to that, and make all this that is already available to some, making all that available to everybody that needs it. And I do think that this would be a good start of the second century of diabetes care. Thank you very much to everybody that participated, to our president, Professor Andrew Bolton, to another president, Niti, to you, Bastian, for great chairing of this meeting, and to all the presenters and the discussants for their effort. And let's transform this effort in the directions that I mentioned. Thank you all.